Hello again. Britain has a rich store of myths about its past. King Arthur and the court at Camelot, Hereward the Wake, and going further back, the idea that this nation was founded by Trojan exiles who arrived in the country thousands of years ago. These myths acted to unify the nation, and they meant that even if an individual was humble and poor, he could gain some reflected glory from being the descendant of those famous refugees from the fall of Troy. These days, almost all of us are aware that these really are just fairy tales. The Romans had their own mythology of their kings being descended from gods, and in India too there is an immensely long poem which details a whole mythic history of the Aryans arriving in the Indian subcontinent. By and large, nobody takes any of it too seriously, any more than we in this country think that King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, Sir Lancelot and the rest of them were real people. Black people who have lived in North America and the Caribbean for centuries, and whose ancestors came originally from West Africa, also have a series of such myths about a lost golden past. The difference between their myths and ours is that a lot of black people in Europe and America actually believe their mythology to be true history. I was prompted to think along these lines by an exchange of comments which I had with a man on one of my videos yesterday. He says that he is black and calls me a racist, which will perhaps come as little or no surprise to anybody. Despite this, we managed to have a perfectly amicable conversation, but in the course of it I realised that we might as well have been speaking different languages. Because while I assumed that real history and linguistics might be the basis for our exchange of views, it became apparent that he himself was motivated by a belief in the literal truth of a myth about an African empire. A couple of years ago I published a video about Aksum, an empire in Ethiopia and Yemen, which flourished between 2000 and 1200 years ago. Something which struck me a few years ago when I was reading an article in the New Scientist about an archaeological dig in Ethiopia was that the two high-status languages in that part of Africa, as I say Amharic and Tigrinya, must be connected in some way with Hebrew and Arabic. I give a link to the article in the description to this video. Those working there are given the dig the nickname Beta Samati, which means house of audience or house of hearing in Tigrinya. Now, at once I realised that this is all but identical to the Hebrew. In Hebrew, house of is Bet, as in the town Bethlehem, house of bread. Viewers will be more familiar with the anglicised version of Bethlehem, which of course is Bethlehem. In Hebrew, to say I heard, you say Shemati, which is all but identical to the Tigrinya Samati, which also means I heard. I read up a bit and listened to recordings of people speaking Tigrinya and found that I could make out a few words, and I saw that the structure and syntax, tenses and some of the vocabulary were the same as Hebrew and Arabic. This is because the Empire of Aksum once included Ethiopia and Yemen, and in Yemen they spoke a language called Sabaean, which is derived from the same root as Arabic and Hebrew, and also Aramaic, of course, the language which Jesus spoke. What I found really weird is that the guy with whom I was corresponding yesterday was utterly convinced that Ge'ez, the archaic language from which Amharic and Tigrinya derived, was a purely African language which originated in Africa and not from anywhere else. I found this very odd, but realised that this kind of thing, the famous kingdom of Aksum, the legendary kingdom of Mansa Musa, and for all I know to the contrary, the kingdom of Prester John, had to be purely black African creations. This was a matter of ideology rather than history. His worldview demanded that it was the case, and because that had to be the case, it must be the case that the language spoken there must be a purely African language, not one imported from the Middle East. We are sometimes told that white supremacists subscribe to some weird myths, Teutonic versions of King Arthur and that they are obsessed with a legendary Aryan master race typified by the Vikings. I have no doubt this is true, and pretty bizarre I find it too. It had, though, not until yesterday struck me that black people had their own version of these myths, and that they too construct a fanciful and legendary past which must, like the myths of white supremacists, be kept clean and not tainted by any outside influence. Suggest to a member of the Aryan Brotherhood that Jewish culture contributed to European civilization, and they will turn purple with fury. It was much the same with the black guy yesterday when I hinted that a language spoken in Africa might be connected in some way with Hebrew. The very idea was shocking and unacceptable. I find this fascinating. It's a link between white supremacists and those who follow a belief that there is something special about Africa and Africans. I shall have more to say about this in a future video.